We're in deep trouble now. The danger level of this evil domain may have reached A level. Without this kid, we might not make it out of here. Boss, you said that beneath the Black Forest, there is an ancient ruin unrecorded even by the Adventurers Guild, and this broken manor is an uncommon A-level evil domain. Who the hell is this kid, and why did he come here? The big shots from the Imperial City have exiled him and put a bounty on his head for total annihilation. His identity must not be simple. It's a pity that we followed him for so long, hoping to squeeze some secrets out of his mouth before killing him, but instead, we've landed in trouble. Wait, he's still alive. Phew, ha. His chest heaved drastically as if he had just awakened from a drowning nightmare. Simon abruptly opened his eyes. He gasped in big gulps of air, gradually alleviating the intense suffocation. As his vision focused, he found himself in a stranger's room. Where am I? Simon tried to struggle to his feet, but realized he was firmly tied to a wooden chair and couldn't move. A strong smell of blood filled his nostrils. His conditions were terrible. There were several bloodstains on his white linen shirt, and wounds that were gaping open. More terrifyingly, his palms were each pinned down by a sharp dagger on the armrests of the chair, with bright red blood flowing out. The intense pain from the struggle pierced through his nerves like a tidal wave. Was I kidnapped? Before he could comprehend the scene he woke up to, Simon's gaze fell on the two ill-looking men in the room. A bald man with purple lips and black circles under his eyes, and another skinny man with green hair, a nose ring, and earrings. They were dressed in black armor full of iron studs and old leather pants, looking like two enthusiasts of a barbaric style. Of course, the most conspicuous were the weapons they wore. A spear. Could they be gangsters? Simon's heart slightly twitched. There were ancient and mysterious inscriptions on the long swords at the waist of both men. However, what puzzled him most was that the bald man's right arm was equipped with a strange, magical armguard. This armguard carried a strong dark industrial style, with almost all parts exposed to the air. The white spray paint on the shoulder position had blurred, with DH-031 written on it. Brass gears, power transmission bearings, mechanical joints, air valves with meters, high-pressure pipes. The joints were smeared with dark lubricating oil. The front end of the magical armguard even had a spiral pattern muzzle the size of a fist and a cross sight. It seemed that this magical armguard was also a handheld cannon. Of course, there were also complex runes engraved on these metal parts. What Simon couldn't understand the most was that white steam was puffing out of the exhaust pipe of the magical armguard. It seemed like some sort of power device. Is it a magical power device? Simon frowned slightly, feeling that he had seen something incredible. In this era, there were still people messing around with antique magical power devices? He wasn't so much shocked as he was puzzled. Was this a movie? No. The severe pain from his palms reminded Simon. He was indeed kidnapped. I remember receiving a strange letter before, then everything went black, and now, I've woken up here. Simon, who had awakened in a strange place, hadn't sorted out his thoughts yet. No matter how hard Simon tried to recall, there wasn't any memory of a kidnapping in his mind. Something wasn't right. He wanted to find more clues, so he looked around the room again. The gleaming magic crystal lamp, the finely carved solid wood furniture, the gold-plated iron handles. Rows of gold-edged parchment books neatly arranged on the shelf, and a family portrait on the wall. The details revealed a strong aristocratic style. It appears this is a study room. From my guess, the house is likely large. The detailed retro decoration indicates the owner is probably an old-school scholar, or this may simply be an old castle tower, but anyway, they are incredibly wealthy. Simon had rapidly made his assumption. But what's the point of kidnapping him if they're so wealthy? The piercing pain from the sharp daggers nailed through his hands reminded him that the two individuals in front of him were ruthless kidnappers. What are these guys planning to do with me? Simon's gaze focused on the two men in the room again. Their European faces, the retro clothing, the magic power armors, it was all so strange. Of course, what was even stranger was that Simon saw his reflection in the glossy ceiling above, a handsome brown-haired teenager, despite his face being smeared with blood. My God, how did I turn into a stranger? Simon vaguely guessed something strange had happened to him. Also, when he woke up, he noticed the strange words in his vision. He blinked, confirming that it wasn't an illusion. His train of thought was abruptly interrupted by a fierce shout, "Hey! Kid, I know you're awake, stop playing dumb." The green-haired skinny man glared at him menacingly and threatened again, "I'm giving you one last chance. Tell me how you knew about this relic and why you came here, or else." As he spoke, he grabbed the dagger handle stabbed through Simon's left hand and twisted it as a warning. Hiss! The excruciating pain shot up to his forehead. Simon's forehead dripped with cold sweat immediately. He gasped for air. he quickly realized that these two were interrogating him, wanting to extract some sort of information from his mouth. Interrogation? Intelligence? The mysterious words in his vision. Suddenly, everything clicked. These guys didn't kidnap me, they kidnapped the original owner. Simon had an epiphany and roughly guessed his situation. At that moment, a bold thought crossed his mind: did I time travel? It was a far-fetched thought, but it seemed like the most logical explanation. Whether it was his blonde body, the two barbaric-styled kidnappers, or the conversation in a language he could understand but not recognize, all confirmed that this was not the world he knew. As an avid fan of online novels, time travel is not an unacceptable concept. After the initial shock, Simon was even more composed. What a disastrous start to being transmigrated and almost dying immediately. One last chance. Hee. The original owner had already been killed once by these two. Simon was not holding any illusions. He had no doubt that after getting what they wanted, the two kidnappers would dispose of him as easily as crushing a cockroach. As he watched their mocking expressions, Simon's eyes gradually darkened. He muttered to himself, "Are you planning to kill again?" Simon knew in his heart that these two guys have had murderous intentions since the beginning. Just like exploring the relics of demons, at the start, he experienced that adrenal rush of intense nerves. Death? Many years ago, I had prepared myself to face death. His childhood experiences had left him lacking the capability to manage certain dangerous personalities. At this moment, facing the threat of death, his body, originally tense from the pain, relaxed completely, as if fear and panic simply did not exist. Regardless of whether it was a space-time shift, or whatever the interrogation situation was. Simon was clear: to survive, there was only one choice. He couldn't avoid these two kidnappers. And these two kidnappers posed a genuine threat to his life. As he thought about it, a repressed idea in his heart became increasingly irresistible, and the look in Simon's eyes gradually grew fierce. So, it has to be, you two must die. The next instant, a crazed smile appeared on his face, and there was no longer any fear of death. Instead, he even seemed to be excited. As if he had switched to another personality. Red-haired Rufus stood on one foot on the chair that bound Simon, growling menacingly, "Hey, kid, I'm not exactly overflowing with patience." They were close, and the injured prey seemed no threat to Rufus, who was completely off guard. Simon was tied to a chair, even his palms pierced by daggers, appearing immobile. Yet unbeknownst to others, the ropes binding Simon's arms had loosened from his previous struggles, providing enough slack for him to free his hands. "Speak up, lad." Rufus slapped Simon hard across the face. With a loud smack, blood trickled from the corner of Simon's mouth, but there was no anger on his face. Instead, a menacing grin formed in the corner of his eye. The demon that had been suppressed for so long in his heart had finally broken free. Hee. A cold laugh echoed in his heart. Without hesitation, Simon violently yanked his right hand back. The dagger pinned through the gap between his middle finger and ring finger, and as he withdrew his hand, there was a chilling ripping sound as the soft tissues were torn apart. The sharp dagger cut through the flesh and skin between his palm bones, and blood spurted out. Rufus was taken aback. The sight of the blood on his robe seemed to shock Rufus. His eyes widened as he tried to comprehend what was happening. He actually tore his hand to get rid of the dagger? In the next moment, Rufus realized the danger, but it was too late. Simon, with a grin on his face, paid no mind to the pain in his hand. With one swift motion, he seized the silver handgun from Rufus's waist and without hesitation aimed it at his chest and pulled the trigger. Bang! Bang! Two thunderous gunshots echoed throughout the library. The bullets pierced Rufus's chest and exploded out two fist-sized holes in his back, killing him instantly with warm blood sprayed across his face. Simon looked even more ferocious. The power of the silver gun was surprisingly strong, and Simon was knocked backward, chair and all, by the recoil. The bald, muscular man in combat gear across from him was stupefied by the sudden turn of events. The once seemingly insignificant lad had shown an unexpectedly brutal side. Seeing the two blood holes in his companion's back, the bald man realized that the prey that had been trapped by the hunter had suddenly become a bloodthirsty wolf. Damn it, the bald man cursed to himself. His reaction was not slow. Seeing Simon's gunpoint aiming at him, he instinctively raised his right mechanical arm with the iron armor, pointing the cannon forward and pulled the trigger. With a deafening boom, the whole library shook. The cannon didn't spit out the flames of burning gunpowder, but a high-pressure air cannon. Simon, who had fallen backward not far away, seemed to have anticipated this attack. He cleverly twisted his angle of fall, perfectly avoiding the lethal aim of the cannon. The sound of the wind whistled past in an instant, as the high-pressure air cannon blasted a hole in the corner of Simon's chair, then cracked through the ground, leaving a bowl-sized black hole in the stone floor and disappearing. Even though he dodged the direct hit, the current from the air cannon grazed his body. As it shattered the chair leg, the shockwave also ground a piece of flesh from Simon's leg and the ropes into dust, like countless sharp wind blades had sliced through, leaving him with a scorching, stinging wound. However, no pain showed on Simon's face, instead a bloodthirsty excitement replaced it. The moment the chair hit the ground, he moved again. From waking up to deciding to take action, Simon took less than half a minute. Although it seemed hasty, his plan was mature. He had already anticipated the attack from the high-pressure air cannon. The unconscious movement of the bald man's mechanical arm told Simon that the rough joints of the mechanical arm were not very flexible. The aiming reaction time would likely be much slower than that of a human. Furthermore, Simon predicted that after killing Rufus, under the threat of his gun, the bald man would definitely counterattack. Therefore, the trajectory of the air cannon had to be where the chair was originally. If he could predict this, his chances of dodging it were high. If the bald man spent too much time aiming precisely, then Simon would have enough time to fire another shot. It was a toss-up between life and death. So, while risky, it was worth a shot. This was the only chance he had to escape, and the main reason why he chose to take a desperate stand and kill, even if it meant injuring his own hand. As his thoughts raced in his head, reality passed in a flash. As Simon had predicted, the bald man hastily fired back, missing his target. The jet tore through the floor, but there was no sign of the anticipated explosion. Simon's eyes narrowed, reflecting a dangerous gleam. Now was the time. He instantly adjusted his defensive posture, and as he fell to the ground, he raised the silver gun again, resolutely aiming at the bald man and pulling the trigger. Bang! The familiar sound of a gunshot seemed to freeze the space around them. The bullet flew out of the gun, its path leaving a long trail in the air, then accurately hit the bald man's eye. The spark from the gunshot illuminated a terrified face, but the bald man could do nothing as the bullet was already shot towards his eye. I've got it. Simon wiped the corner of his mouth, seemingly satisfied with the shot. It was different from the close-range killing of Rufus when he had the chance to fire twice. After this shot, the huge recoil made the muzzle rise drastically, and it was impossible to hit the bald man's head again even if he fired another shot. Besides, the wound on his palm was torn by the recoil of the shot, causing his finger flexors to twitch from the pain and he almost couldn't hold the gun. But, that was enough. Simon was sure that this shot would absolutely hit the target, enough to blow the man's head off. But, against all odds, this surefire shot went wrong. How is it possible? Simon's eyes widened in disbelief as he watched the scene in front of him. The bullet was aimed at the bald man's eye socket, and the man's crisis response was not weak. In the instant of the gunshot spark, he instinctively dodged. He tilted his head slightly, and the bullet hit his forehead. Normally, given the power of this large-caliber handgun, as long as it hit the head, it would definitely shatter like a watermelon, regardless of where it hit. But surprisingly, it didn't. Staring at the bizarre scene before him, Simon was in shock that he watched, wide-eyed, as the bullet from the gun struck the bald, muscular man's skull, and then, lodged in it? What on earth? How could his skull be so hard? In that moment, Simon instantly recognized that he had likely stepped into a world that was far beyond his imagination. Armored mechanical arms, humans who could survive a gunshot to the head. After a moment of shock, Simon's eyes cleared, the wild rage that had been there dissipated, and at that time, the bald, muscular man, who had taken a bullet to the skull but was almost unscathed, also looked back at him with a menacing glare. Damn, things have gone south. Simon met the murderous glare of the bald brute and gave a bitter laugh in his heart. To steal a crossbow, kill the cockerel, and then take the chance to find an opportunity to reload and kill the bald brute. The plan was originally well thought out and luck was on his side. Everything was proceeding as planned, and even the flamethrower didn't cause him much harm. Unfortunately, the final arrow didn't kill the bald brute. After all, a normal person would never imagine that the enemy would possess a superhuman ability to physically resist crossbow bolts. After reloading, Simon had completely lost the initiative. The bald brute plucked the crossbow bolt embedded in his forehead, a mocking smile on his face. He didn't fire the flamethrower on his iron-armored arm again, but stomped his foot, a ripple of air exploded, and his figure disappeared on the spot. Before Simon could gather his thoughts, the bald brute had ghost-like advanced several meters and appeared in front of Simon. The armored hand effortlessly grabbed Simon's throat, and with the momentum of the collision, threw Simon and the iron chair he was tied to against the wall. With a cracked sound, the chair shattered, and broken iron fragments rained down. Simon didn't have time to react at all. It felt as if he was hit by an elephant. Everything went black. He couldn't help but cough, and a mouthful of blood mixed with organ fragments spewed out. The silver crossbow bolt in his hand also fell to the ground. He had lost his only weapon of resistance, and now it seemed that the crossbow bolt was of little use. The bald brute's speed was ridiculously fast, exploding at close range, so fast that the eye couldn't keep up. It was another ability beyond human limits. However, this didn't surprise Simon anymore. Being shot in the head and not dying, being a bit faster was nothing to be surprised at. The bald brute glared menacingly at Simon, who was pinned against the wall with his feet off the ground, and growled, "Kid, bet you didn't see this coming. My awakened talent is C079, Strengthened Skeleton. If it weren't for this ability, I might have fallen into your hands today." Saying this, the bald brute glanced at the body of his companion lying in a pool of blood on the ground, his eyes growing colder. Thinking back to the tricky arrow just now, he had a lingering fear. If he hadn't dodged the vital spot, he might have been a corpse on the ground right now. The bald brute exerted force in his hand, wanting to strangle the kid in front of him to death, but thinking of something, he hesitated for a moment. In Simon's mind, he murmured, talents, strength and skeleton? Superhuman abilities. Then he closed his eyes weakly. The armored hand of the bald brute gripped his throat like a pair of iron pliers, and the intense suffocation left no doubt that the guy could easily break a person's neck. But not being killed immediately, Simon was not panicked at all. Because he saw the bald brute's hesitation, he knew very clearly that the only reason this guy didn't kill him right away was because he coveted the original owner's secret. But at this moment, the patience of the bald brute was probably worn out due to his companion's death. Simon knew that if he said one more word, this guy might kill him in a fit of rage. So, he exhaled the last breath in his chest, and with difficulty, spat out 5 words, I have a holy artifact map. As expected, as soon as these words came out, the killing intent still remained, but Simon clearly felt the suffocation lessen. The iron hand on his throat quietly loosened up to let him breathe. Ha! A snort of disdain echoed in the air. The bald, muscular man was not as foolish as he appeared to be. He knew Simon was trying to bargain for his life, yet, he gave Simon a chance, his voice cold as ice. Boy, you only have one chance. Tell me something that would pique my interest, and I'll grant you a swift death. As soon as he finished speaking, his iron-like hand tightened, a clear sound of bone breaking echoed. Simon's eyebrows twitched in pain. On the outside, he looked weak and squinted his eyes. Actually, he was quickly scanning the information on his magical eye. A swift death? He didn't care for that. He began, the 7th door on the left side of the main hallway in the banquet hall of this tower. There's a secret door. The wall sconce is a switch leading underground, to a labyrinth. These words were not made up on the spot, but the information he got from his magical in such a short time, in a completely unfamiliar world, a flawless lie would be easily seen through, and the outcome of being exposed would be nothing but death. He didn't know how this information was left on his magical eye, but once he closes his eyes, Simon could see the message. It read, My dear Felix, by the time you see this message, your memory should have been wiped. Though fate is cruel, it's already too late. The truth doesn't matter to you anymore. I know you might be unwilling to accept this, so I left you something, as compensation. If fate hasn't forsaken you, and if you ever become powerful enough to seek the truth, you will naturally come across the banished truth. If not, living in darkness may be a blessing to you. Remember, trust no one, especially those in the upper ranks of the Black Tower. Apart from these words, the rest were some obscure texts he didn't have time to read closely. They seemed to be explanations about a magical power called alchemy in this world, and then there was a peculiar map. It wasn't a flat map, but a 3-dimensional one with winding fluorescent lines, marking from top to bottom. It looked like a mine, or perhaps a deep cave. Simon took a quick glance and understood the situation. His predecessor was named Felix, who seemed to have been exiled for some reason, but all of these had nothing to do with him. The time traveler. He had no memory, nor any interest in the host's past. Simon was more concerned about his current predicament, judging from the address. An apparent relative of the host had left these words on his magical eye, and it was because of this information that the host came to this tower, to search for the place marked on the map, ancient ruins. He didn't have time to look closely, but it probably had something to do with the miraculous, supernatural talent, like the bald man's bullet-resistant skull. Simon selectively shared some information, leaving out the key points. For example, he didn't mention the details of navigating the labyrinth, nor did he mention that among the many sconces in the room, only the correct one could open the underground passage. The others would trigger traps. To survive from this murderous man, he had to show his worth, and to keep living, he couldn't reveal all his worth at once. As long as the man wasn't a fool, he wouldn't kill Simon now. Sure enough, upon hearing this, a flicker of surprise flashed in the bald man's eyes. He had guessed early on that this boy, who was targeted for assassination by the inner city nobles, had secrets. But after losing a brother, the bald man became more cautious. He asked, what kind of treasure is hidden in this tower? Pretending to be weak, Simon closed his eyes, looked at the text on the magical eye, and said accordingly, rumor has it, it's a relic left by the Isaac's knight. No sooner had the words left his mouth, the bald man's face changed drastically as if he had heard something extraordinary. What? His tone suddenly heavy. Simon glanced up at him. Although the term Isaac's knight was a mystery, one look at the bald strongman's expression revealed that it must be some sort of extraordinary treasure. However, for Simon, this was undoubtedly good news. Now, he was even more confident that his life was not at risk for the time being. Simon's words stirred up a storm in the bald strong man's heart. He immediately retorted, is there really an artifact left by Sir Isaac in this mansion? Simon spat out blood rather meticulously before answering, yes, at least that's what the treasure map that I got says. Upon hearing the confirmation again, the bald strong man's eyes rolled as if he was weighing something, excitement, anticipation, hesitation, and a hint of concern. He looked at Simon, a hint of suspicion flashing in his eyes. but he suppressed his killing intent. If he did not know the secret of the mansion, he could kill him, but now that he knew there was such a treasure in the mansion, how could he let it go? Being a veteran leader of the scavenger group in Old Linden City, how could he not know the value of Sir Isaac's artifacts? That legendary alchemist, who was said to have perfected ancient alchemy and hailed as a demigod, researched countless new alchemical formulas and various unique potions in his lifetime, and held numerous patents. Each of his alchemical manuscripts fetched astronomical prices in Linden's black market. The bald strong man had personally witnessed, at an inner-city auction, someone paying a sky-high price of 300 gold kronas for a page of useless daily notes, simply because it was a note written by Sir Isaac himself. To give you an idea, the DH031 fine-tuned version mechanical arm he was wearing, along with the modification costs, was only worth a few dozen gold kronas. Although the bald strong man knew Simon might be hiding something, as long as it involved Sir Isaac, it was worth betting his life on. If he really found an artifact left by Sir Isaac, it would mean instant wealth, wouldn't it? Would he need to risk his life scavenging for the rest of his days? With these thoughts, the bald strong man squinted his eyes and asked coldly, "Who exactly are you, lad?" "I don't know either," Simon replied in a feigned cluelessness, adding after a moment's pause, "My memory has been erased." It was no mistake to say so given the information on the retinal display about the original owner being memory erased. Upon hearing this, the bald strong man fell into a moment of contemplation. That he did not seem to be suspicious, nor did he further question, being banished from the inner city, with a bounty on his head, his identity was definitely not simple, and the explanation of memory erasure was plausible. That he did not delve further into Simon's identity, but instead asked, "How did you get the treasure map you mentioned?" "I don't know who left it to me," Simon replied. He paused, then added, "I once came across it in an old book, and then I burned it." The bald strong man frowned, saying nothing. During their previous interrogation, they had searched him and found no potential treasure maps. So, it seemed, he could not kill him now. He guessed that Simon must be holding something back. No one would be so silly as to reveal all their life-saving secrets at once. The hand that was gripping his neck like a clamp loosened. Simon knew he had temporarily saved his life. Though he seemed a bit disheveled, he was always calm inside. To truly survive, he needed another plan. The bald strong man was clearly wary of him, constantly asking about the treasure map. But just then, a desperate cry like a wail from a ghost or howl from a wolf came from outside the door. "Captain, Captain, where are you? Help!" The sudden cry made the atmosphere in the room immediately eerie. Upon hearing it, the bald strong man's expression immediately turned serious. Only then did he realize he was still in what seemed to be an A-level, cursed space. This mansion still hid unknown dangers. Simon didn't know what terrible things had happened to the guy outside, but from his tone of despair, he could guess that something very terrifying had happened. The bald strong man's brows furrowed tightly. Using Simon's neck as a shield, he went to open the door. With a click, the door opened. Just then, a blood-soaked man rushed in with a look of panic on his face. It was clear that the bald strong man recognized the man in the leather armor. He frowned and called his name, "Marcus?" The man looked at the bald strong man, and the color of his pale face suddenly turned rosy. He joyfully shouted, "Captain Ivan!" After a pause, the fear on his face turned into relief from surviving a calamity. He gasped for breath and said, "Oh, God. Captain, I finally found you." From the corner of his eye, Simon quietly watched this scene, and only then did he learn their names. Captain, sounds like some sort of organization. Simon looked at the wounds and bloodstains on Marcus, and then at the smoking gun in his hand, wondering, cut wounds from a sharp weapon. How did a gunman get cut by a blade? Perhaps, it wasn't a person. Clearly, things didn't seem quite simple. Meanwhile, the bald strong man looked at Marcus, who was alone, and then stuck his head out to check outside the door. Noticing nothing unusual after closing the door, he asked with a serious face, "Where's Deputy Mark, Daniel, and the others?" "Captain, they're all dead, all dead." Marcus's eyes were full of fear. As if recalling something, he said with a sob, "Just now, when we entered this cursed space, we got lost. Then we found many terrifying dolls in this house. There seems to be a ghost species mysteriously controlling these dolls. It's like it's everywhere. It wants us to play games with them, hide and seek. If found, we'll be killed." Ghost species? Upon hearing his subordinate's stuttering account, Captain Ivan's face was full of gravity. Ghost species? Mysterious? Simon caught a few words he understood but were outside his original knowledge. However, having witnessed the extraordinary abilities of this world, he quickly understood that these words must refer to a kind of extraordinary creature. It had just killed more than 10 of the bald strong man's squad members. Before crossing over, Simon was a channel host who did commentary on horror games and supernatural movies, so the story Marcus just told, while bizarre, didn't seem too far-fetched to him. He wasn't too shocked, but felt strangely familiar. A horror plot? This seems like the right progression. Vaguely, he could deduce some of the ghost species' habits, such as enjoying torturing humans, and playing childish games. Now it seemed that the fatal threat was not just this bald man, there was also a ghost species. While the bald strong man was carefully inquiring about his subordinate's condition, Simon, who was deep in thought, seemed to have suddenly discovered something and raised his eyebrows. His gaze shifted from Marcus and suddenly landed on a red, black, and green soldier doll in the corner of the study that resembled a nutcracker. He had previously thought it was purely decorative, but he wasn't sure if he was mistaken. But Simon thought he saw the doll's eyes tremble just now, and at that moment, the doll's black eyes were staring straight at the three of them in the room. Upon reflection, Simon noticed the anomaly and thought to himself, I thought I remembered it wrong. But it really moved. He remembered it very clearly. When he was being held against the opposite wall by the bald strong man, the puppet's gaze was to the left, right at them, but now, they had moved to the right side of the door, and the doll's eyes were still staring at them. So, the position of the people moved, the puppet didn't move, but its eye direction did. This was a habit he picked up from playing horror escape room games. In confined spaces, his gaze would instinctively gather all the clues around to break the game. That's when he noticed the difference in the nutcracker doll. So, I've been watched by someone. Simon noted the anomaly, a flicker of realization shone in his eyes. Initially, he thought he might have misseen, but now hearing about a murderous puppet in this house, Simon promptly confirmed that everything in the room had been under the surveillance of some hidden entity. Perhaps it was that so-called ghost species. However, even with this discovery, Simon's face didn't show the slightest bit of surprise for him, even though he was still uncertain about the concept of strangeness in the house. From the expressions of the two bald men, it was definitely some dangerous existence, but this didn't mean that this strangeness would be more lethal to Simon than these two bald guys. It might even be good news. To survive from the grasp of these bald guys, this strangeness might be a condition that he could exploit. After hearing his subordinate's report, the bald, muscular man asked, how's the fighting ability of those puppets? Not too strong. They all use cold weapons, and firearms can easily smash their bodies. Marcus, who was evidently still shaken, swallowed hard before continuing, but there are simply too many of them, and they can't be killed. Even if they're blown to bits, leaving only a severed arm, they can still chop people. And, the house is full of puppets. They can appear from any corner, from inside a cabinet, behind a door, the basement, so they can be smashed with firearms? I see. The macho bald man, having listened carefully to his subordinate's account, had a better grasp of the situation that he analyzed. It looks like that spectral entity's ability is to control puppets to kill, probably a first-order anomaly. Otherwise, if it had second-order powers, it wouldn't have such a hard time killing you. Our previous estimation of this cursed space being an A level was an overestimation. It's at most B level. Simon, who was standing by, did not agree with the bald man's analysis after hearing it. According to his experience of watching more than 1,000 horror films, that spectral entities' actions gave him the impression of, hey, I'm not killing you, just playing. Murder was more like a game to it. Now, the bald man only had two choices: either leave this bizarre mansion immediately, or continue to look for the artifacts of Sir Isaac. No matter what choice he made, he would likely have to face that spectral entity in the house. If the ability of the anomaly was simply controlling the puppets, it wouldn't pose a significant threat to the bald man. At least, puppets of that level were not fatal in his eyes. The best outcome would be to retrieve the treasure and kill the anomaly. But if that spectral entity's ability was more than that, even if they chose not to search for the treasure and fled, they would have to face it. The leader of a seasoned scavenger team, the bald man made his decision without any hesitation. Let's go. We're going to see what's strange about this mansion. Being the live map, Simon naturally had to be taken along. The bald man, looking at his subordinate, gave another order: Marcus, keep an eye on this kid. If there's any movement, kill him immediately. Marcus glanced at Simon next to him, responding, yes, leader. Simon wasn't surprised that the bald man decided to continue their exploration. He would have done the same. What surprised him was that before leaving, the bald man demonstrated another unimaginable ability. Simon originally thought the bald man's steam mechanical arm was amazing enough. But now, to his surprise, the bald man called out, rune implantation. He saw the man quickly perform several hand seals, then mumbling an incantation at a rapid pace. This strange act of a shaman, however, triggered miraculous changes. As soon as he finished speaking, golden lights appeared in the room. Upon closer inspection, a glowing golden hexagram magic circle appeared under the man's feet. Its patterns were complex and mysterious, radiating a magical power that gave one a glimpse into the infinite depths of the void. A strong sense of mystery engulfed the place. Magic? Simon blinked in surprise upon seeing this, and what happened next was even more bizarre. After the magic circle's glow faded, the tattoos on the man's exposed skin slowly solidified into objects. Upon closer inspection, they had turned into a layer of gleaming metallic scale armor. After the ritual, the bald man, now covered in dazzling golden scale armor, had completely transformed, becoming a majestic and imposing figure. Marcus, who was standing by, seemed to regain his composure, his tone a bit flattering. No matter how many times I see it, the leader's alchemical implantation, the golden radiant scale armor, is always so awe-inspiring. The bald man nodded without saying much and said in his deep voice, follow me. With that, he opened the door and walked out without fear. The scene before his eyes piqued Simon's interest even more. He noticed that those golden scales were formed from the tattoos on the bald man's body after the magic circle appeared. Obviously, this was another superpower that exceeded Simon's understanding. Before he could think more about it, he was jerked forward by the rope tied to him, nearly stumbling and the instant his last foot stepped out of the room, Simon suddenly thought of something. Instead of avoiding it, he turned his head and looked directly at the nutcracker puppet in the corner, giving it a smile. The meaning was clear. I've discovered you. Since he had found it, why not trigger it? Based on his many years of experience playing terrifying games, triggering certain specific conditions might lead to unexpected plot developments, although most of the time such actions were suicidal. But, considering the current situation, it couldn't get any worse, could it? In a flash, Simon and the others had already left the room. At this point, no one saw that the nutcracker puppet's lower jaw started to tremble, making a creepy clicking sound, as if it was laughing. Kid, you go first. Compared to the bald man's caution and Marcus's tiptoeing, Simon appeared much more calm. He was also very self-aware. Although in his past life, his melee and gunplay were quite good, but in this fantastical world, where bodies could resist bullets, he was merely at the combat ineptitude level. To survive, using his brain was definitely more practical than using his hands. He was tied with a rope, acting as a human shield in the front, but this was just fine, as Simon could carefully observe everything in the corridor. As he had suspected earlier, this was a luxurious manor. The hallway was brightly lit, but not with magic light stones or magic gas lamps, but with glowing gems and glass lampshades. There were many closed doors on both sides of the hallway, the floor was covered with soft woolen rugs, and there were exquisite oil paintings on the walls at intervals, but this hallway seemed a bit too long. After walking for a while without seeing an end, Marcus, his voice trembling, asked, "Leader, where are we going? We seem to be trapped." Bald Ivan pondered for a moment, seemingly also noticing the strangeness of the mansion, and asked, "Kid, where's the room you mentioned?" Simon took a look and responded directly, "I've never been here. But, to find the room on the treasure map, we must first find the banquet hall." He had already found out that no matter how large the mansion was, this hallway was weirdly long. Before he could say more, a creepy old woman's laughter rang out around them. Hee, according to the game rules, if you're found, you'll be killed. The low, demonic voice didn't sound like it could come from a human, sending chills down their spines. Upon hearing this, Marcus turned pale, as if he had been greatly frightened, stammering, "It's coming. It's coming." Every time they heard this voice, someone in their team would be killed. Marcus was on the brink of breakdown, trembling all over. Simon cast his gaze around the corridor, silently leaning against the wall and becoming extra cautious. Ivan, however, snorted in disdain, "Stop playing tricks." Just then, several shadowy figures seemed to float over from a distance. Upon closer inspection, they were bizarre puppets floating in midair. They were crudely fashioned, like lotus roots strung together. But each held a slender sharp knife. Their jaws clacked at a high frequency, making a click-clack sound that sent chills down one's spine. So, these are the murderous puppets in the mansion he was talking about. They can even fly. Simon stared at these puppets that were swiftly converging from both sides of the corridor, his eyelids twitching uncontrollably. Suddenly, a muffled boom sounded. Even without looking, one could feel the shockwave, enough to almost knock a person off balance. It was clear Ivan had fired. His shot directly hit the massive puppet several dozen meters away, causing a clattering chaos and shattering the front line of the puppets. However, this hardly deterred the onslaught of the remaining puppets. The amputated puppets, carrying a heap of parts, continued their relentless charge. Humph! Ivan gave a shout, fearlessly charging into the massive puppets. His metallic scale armor proved extremely effective at this moment. The puppet's blades struck against it and sparks flew, but they failed to cause any harm. This bald guy is really strong, but these puppets are practically indestructible. If we don't break the deadlock, we'll eventually be worn down. Simon, with his hands tied and limited mobility, saw his chances of survival plummet in the face of this puppet onslaught, but he wasn't about to give up. This moment, Marcus had been so scared that even his gun-holding hand was trembling, and he had long since dropped the rope that was binding Simon. With most of the puppets engaged with Ivan, Simon saw his chance. Now's the time. Simon quickly assessed his surroundings and without hesitation, kicked off the ground with one leg, then hurled himself toward a glass window on one side of the corridor. Having made previous observations, he knew that outside the window was a foggy area, and although uncertain which floor the corridor was on, it was definitely not a high-rise. The chances of falling to his death were slim, but just as he took this leap, things went awry again. With a crash, Simon easily shattered the glass window, and his entire body flew out, falling into the thick fog. He had assumed he would land in a garden or somewhere similar, and had prepared himself for a high-altitude fall, but to his surprise, he landed on a soft carpet. Looking around at the familiar surroundings, Simon froze. Holy crap! I'm back here again. The bright stone path felt eerily familiar. The sound of fighting echoed around him, and he looked at the metallic, armored figure. Wasn't it the same hallway he was just in? Am I back again? Simon rubbed his twitching eyelids in disbelief. Had he been flung out of one mirror, only to be thrown back through another? He turned around to see the shattered mirror magically restored. If it wasn't for the shards still littering the floor, he would have thought it was all an illusion. Something was seriously wrong with the space in this castle tower. An illusionary space? Or perhaps, it's the ability of this ghost species. Simon felt more and more baffled by this world, but quickly deduced, so that's why. If it had been so easy to escape by jumping out of the window, those tough men wouldn't have been killed by these weird puppets. With that leap, Simon found himself back in the hallway, crashing into a pile of puppets. Well, he was certainly in the lion's den now. The puppets might not hurt the armored figure much, but to an ordinary human like Simon, they were a deadly threat. Just as Simon had resigned himself to his fate, he noticed something strange. The puppets seemed to disregard him, breezing past him to attack the armored figure. Ha! They didn't attack me. Watching the puppets glide by, Simon felt a jolt of surprise. He speculated quietly, could it be because they realized I spotted the surveillance? He guessed that the reason why the puppets did not kill him might be that the ghost species thought it had found a new toy and was reluctant to break it so soon. That was definitely a vexing thought. At that moment, he heard a chilling series of cracked sounds. Upon looking, he saw that each of Marcus's joints had unnaturally twisted and broken. Like a puppet, he was suspended in midair by unseen threads, his head drooping lifelessly. Marcus was dead. After the death of Marcus, the knife-wielding puppets ceased their attack on the armored figure, Ivan, retreating like a receding tide and disappearing down the hallway, not far away. Ivan was obviously dumbfounded by the sudden death of his subordinate, cursing, "Damn it! There were no puppets around Marcus when he died. How had he perished?" Ivan quickly realized that the ghost species might not just manipulate puppets. Naturally, Ivan noticed that Simon had been spared by the puppets, wondering if he knew something. But before he could ask, a solid iron door not far away suddenly opened. At that moment, an affable old man in a long robe walked out of the door, speaking in a monotonous voice. "My master invites you both to dine in the banquet hall." "Master? Banquet?" Simon raised an eyebrow at the sound of that. It didn't sound like anything good. While listening, he observed the servant-like old man. His eyes never moved as he spoke, and upon closer inspection, his skin had a waxy sheen to it. Clearly, this servant wasn't a living being. Simon remained calm. But even if he wanted to make a fuss, he couldn't fight this. But Ivan's temper was not so easily tamed. "You just killed one of my men, and now you're inviting us to dinner? Go to hell." Ivan cursed and fired his weapon. Boom! The servant was blasted into pieces. At that moment, that low, ominous voice echoed again, sneering, "If you don't follow the game rules, you'll be killed." Humph. Ivan snorted dismissively, still seeming somewhat unconcerned. Suddenly and without warning, Ivan became rigid. This situation was exactly the same as when Marcus died earlier. This time, Simon, who was not far away, saw clearly. Ivan was bound by translucent threads as thin as fishing lines, rendering him completely immobile. As the threads tightened, Ivan's metallic skin scales even cracked open, and the threads cut into his flesh, spilling bright red blood. Simon watched with a racing heartbeat. What a strange method. Clearly, the power behind this was far more formidable than he had imagined. Ivan, who was about to be torn into pieces any second, lost all his previous toughness, yelling, "Wait, I'll go." And so, Simon and Ivan, whose servant was half blown apart, were invited into the dining hall. The decor here was just as luxurious. The music box was playing soothing music. There were many people seated at the dining table, creating a lively atmosphere. The meals seemed harmonious. Simon was guided to an empty seat by a doll maid. He took a glance at the people at the table and quickly understood. Although these people were sitting in their places, their faces were expressionless, and their bodies were rigid. Not one was alive. Either they were puppets or corpses fixed to their seats with threads, which looked extremely eerie. However, Simon was not too surprised. He naturally wouldn't expect that these ghost races would be kind enough to invite them for dinner. Looking at Ivan's disgusted face, it seemed he recognized these corpses. Both of them took their seats, and the doll maid behind them put on dining bibs for them and then unveiled the meal covered by a silver lid. When Simon sat down, he smelled a strong scent of blood and vaguely guessed what was coming. As soon as the lid was opened, the scent of blood was even stronger. A piece of red-brown liver, still slightly bloody, seemed to have been freshly removed from a live body. Since there were probably no live animals in this mansion, anyone could guess whose liver this was. Simon raised his eyebrows, unsurprised. If there was normal food in this strange mansion, that would be strange. He had played many twisted horror games, and this plot wasn't too outrageous. Looking at the green-haired figure next to him, this human head seemed to be an old acquaintance, the rooster head he had killed in the study earlier. At this moment, that persistent voice sounded again. "The rule of the game is, you must finish eating. Otherwise, you'll die." Just then, all the people at the table, whether puppets or corpses, turned their heads and stared at the two live humans with hollow eyes. The servant on the side also warned in a stern tone, "What's wrong, esteemed guests, doesn't the food suit your palate?" Simon and Ivan, of course, had no intention of eating the food on their plates. But whether they ate or not was not up to them. At this time, transparent threads had quietly fallen from the beams and bound their limbs. Simon was aware of it, but he didn't feel anything unusual. Ivan on the side clearly realized what was happening, his face paled, and he muttered in despair, "Psychic body control, at least at gold level, ghost race, we're done for." Simon had already experienced the power of these threads. He thought it was simple physical control and believed that he might stand a chance if he found an opportunity. However, it was only sitting here that he confirmed that the ghost race was also proficient in mind control. This was an ability that could easily kill him. Simon listened carefully to what Ivan was muttering. Soon, he also understood what body control meant. At this time, he found his hands moving uncontrollably. He picked up the dining knife and fork next to the plate and began to cut up the goose liver in the dish, his movements elegant and gentlemanly. This feeling was strange. It was not merely being a puppet on a string. It was as if his brain had lost control of his body, and he could only watch as his hands uncontrollably cut the meat in the dish. Slice by slice, the plate was full of fresh blood. Not far away, Ivan had already swallowed a plump goose liver, crunching as he chewed. The sound of chewing, in this quiet dining hall, was particularly creepy. Simon's gaze gradually became somewhat solemn. Because he also picked up a fork and stabbed a large piece of bloody lamb, sending it to his mouth. If he didn't think of a solution, he would probably taste human organs for the first time. He knew that if he didn't find a way out, he would eventually be killed by the ghost clan. The eerie mansion, the mysterious puppets, a ghost clan that enjoys torturing humans. Simon's thoughts began to spin rapidly. Suddenly, he had an idea, a flash of insight. The mystery in this room has the ability to easily kill us, yet it didn't. This shows that the mystery is intelligent, and not low at that. A monster with intelligence was a good thing for him. What he feared was a monster that only knew how to kill instinctively. That would be a dead end. He couldn't fight it. But from his experience with thousands of terrifying legends and stories, as long as a non-player character has intelligence, they can turn the plot around, find clues, through conversation. The study, the corridor, the banquet hall, the clues in his mind suddenly came together. Simon felt that he had probably found the key to the situation. Phew. He sighed internally. Simon decided to give it a try. At this moment, his expression suddenly changed, and he said something inexplicable towards the void. "Penelope Eisenhart, may I speak with you?" As soon as he spoke, it was as if time had stopped. Simon's right hand, which was about to put the lamb into his mouth, also stopped in midair. Hearing these words, the bald man nearby who was indulging in red wine was visibly taken aback. He didn't understand why Simon would suddenly say something so inexplicable. However, at this moment, a response came from the void. How do you know my name?" It was still the same low, eerie voice of the old woman. He was right. Simon, hearing this, immediately realized that his deduction was not wrong. The guy Marcus had said before that the Ghost Clan had discovered them, but didn't directly kill them, instead played a few game challenges, hide and seek, stone throwing, wooden ball games. As long as they abide by the rules of the game, they could survive temporarily, but if they broke the rules, they would be killed immediately. The same situation is happening now. This mystery could easily kill them but chose to play. This also proves that the Ghost Clan is not old, or rather, the mental age is not old. And on this dining table, there are only 3 puppets in addition to the corpses, a suit gentleman, a lady, and a young woman. The gentleman is seated in the main seat. Obviously, this is a family of 3. And Simon had noticed when he was on the table earlier that these 3 people seemed familiar. Upon thinking carefully, he remembered a family photo he had seen on the wall in the study. In the photo, these 3 people were clearly present. But there was a 4th person in that photo. A little girl holding a teddy bear. So, the rest is not hard to guess. The butler referred to it as the master of the mansion, and also likes bloody pranks. Then the identity of this Ghost Clan can only be that little girl. And under that photo, there was a name labeled Penelope Eisenhart. Simon didn't answer the question, but said directly, "Can I chat with you?" Although he didn't know what the Ghost Clan mystery was, it was probably similar to the ghost in his memory. Moreover, since he knew that her mental age was not high, then, the space to talk, fool, would be larger. So, the first thing is to arouse its interest. He continued, "I can tell many interesting stories, dance, sing, puppet drama, puppet performance. I think Miss Penelope would like." As soon as the words were spoken, there was silence in the room for a while. Simon thought that the matter was not quite ripe yet, but at this moment, the surrounding scene suddenly changed, from a banquet hall to a girlish bedroom decorated in pink. At the desk by the window, sat a girl in a pink princess dress who seemed to be seriously assembling some puppet parts. Hearing the sound, she didn't turn her head back and said directly, "You haven't said, how do you know my name?" A very gentle girl's voice, soft and glutinous. The first step was successful. Successfully aroused her interest. Simon quickly observed everything in the room, and said, "I saw your name on the portrait when I was in the study." He tried to speak in as calm a tone as possible, just fearing to anger the other party. Because he knew that the seemingly harmless little girl in front of him had a twisted mentality of torturing humans. The girl asked again, "How did you find me in the study before?" Apparently, she was talking about the iron nutcracker. Simon thought this was a good sign, at least she took the initiative to strike up a conversation, and replied, "Because I saw the eyeballs of that puppet move." "Oh, so that's how it is." The girl heard these words and slowly put down the rune puppet in her hand. It seemed as if time had stopped for a moment, and then, she slowly turned around. Seeing this, Simon's pupils narrowed slightly, and he vaguely felt that there would be a major plot twist. Sure enough. And in the next instant, that girl turned her face towards Simon, and suddenly returned to her previous low, terrifying voice, and asked ominously, "Now, do you still want to chat with me?" This was a face that had been burned to a crisp, all the features were wrinkled together by the high temperature, and the mouth and nose were only left with 3 holes. A normal person would definitely be startled when they suddenly saw this face. But what surprised the girl was that Simon's expression remained unchanged, there was no horror, no disgust, no fear. He was staring seriously at the girl's face, and there was even a warm smile on his face. If you have watched 1,000 horror movies, you are probably hard to scare. In horror movies, there are not 100 types of backstabbing plots, there are 80, sulfuric acid, burning, cutting, sores, all kinds of horrifying and disgusting images. So, when Simon saw this burned face, he was not very shocked. He knew that if he had shown any terrified or afraid expression just now, he might have triggered some instant death effect, and he certainly wouldn't be able to chat anymore. However, he passed the first hurdle smoothly. Simon got straight to the point, "Of course, Miss Penelope Eisenhart. I can feel your loneliness." He mimicked the tone of the psychiatrist who treated him before, and started the conversation. The girl was startled, she didn't seem to have thought about what to do if the other party wasn't scared by her terrifying appearance. Simon didn't give her a chance to react, and immediately began to tell his own story. "When I was in a juvenile correctional facility, I was often put in solitary confinement." "Oh, a juvenile correctional facility is a place where naughty kids are kept. So, I can understand the loneliness of being locked in a small room by myself. I was born in a very warm family, but when I was very young, my parents left. If you've read 800 books, you won't think there's anything new in the world." Italian Marcus said, "There are only 36 plots in the world: appeal, rescue, revenge, revenge between flesh and blood, chase, disaster, misfortune, unraveling, seeking." When Simon saw Penelope Eisenhart, he immediately deduced a lot of plots. Burns? Either it's an accident, or it's a victim. There is also the family sitting neatly in the castle dining room turned into rune puppets, either it's longing, or it's hatred. And from the limited clues, this should be a harmonious family. Penelope Eisenhart was probably born in a loving family, and then at about 10 years old, she was killed in a sudden castle fire. Life also stopped at that year. Simon is not all about fooling, but he can truly feel that loneliness. Because he tells his own story. Perhaps only those who are tortured can understand those who are tortured. He was given so much psychological counseling in the juvenile correctional institution, and read so many psychological scrolls, the art of mental exchange for troubled youths is simply at his fingertips. Although this mystery is very powerful, her supernatural abilities can easily kill 100 Simons. But after all, the mental age is just a naive little girl. Having wisdom, there is an emotional need. This is what the psychiatrist who treated him before said. The desire to survive drowned out Simon's guilt of fooling the little girl, and they actually started chatting slowly. "My name is Simon, nice to meet you, Miss Penelope Eisenhart. Aren't you afraid of me?" "No. I can tell that Penelope is a good girl." "No, I've killed many people. I've killed many people too. When I was 12, a group of thugs insulted and killed my neighbor's sister. I chased them down 3 streets with a sword and killed each one of them. Not all killers are evil, maybe those who were killed deserved to die." From the charred face of Simon, Penelope saw a hint of curiosity, as if she found a sense of agreement in his words. After a pause, he remembered to give a little psychological suggestion, saying, "Later in the juvenile correctional facility, my doctor told me that bad people should be punished, but good people should not be harmed." "Oh. Penelope muttered something that she didn't quite understand. After a moment, she asked softly, "What do you think is a good person?" Simon, from a personal perspective, the difference between good and bad people lies in whether they conform to one's values. At least until today, I think those guys deserve to die. Penelope is smart and clearly caught Simon's point. A sly look appeared in her eyes as she asked, "So, are you a good person?" Simon unabashedly replied, "Of course." Giggle. At this point, the room was filled with bell-like laughter. The atmosphere was no longer as tense as before. Most girls are vain, and the little girl returned to her original look in the photo, with blonde hair and green eyes, looking obedient and cute. Simon was sharing his story. The loneliness from their tortured experiences made it easy for them to resonate with each other. In no time, they were sitting side by side like good friends. Simon was telling her some bizarre stories from Earth, while Penelope would share some past events from the castle. "My parents are both exceptional alchemists, they are always busy. Only these rune puppets could keep me company, but unfortunately, they can't talk." Simon didn't ask about the castle fire. It was obvious that bringing it up would trigger Penelope's painful memories. Instead, they talked about happy and interesting trivial matters. The plot was unfolding as he expected. Simon's goal was to survive, so it seemed like he wouldn't be killed. However, it felt like there was something more. Resonance is always mutual. Even without a favorability panel like in a game, Simon felt that he got along quite well with this little girl. After a long chat, Penelope Eisenhart seemed satisfied and a cute smile spread across her face. "Thank you, no one has talked to me for many years." The girl seemed to think of something and said, "But you can't stay by my side for too long. Otherwise, you will suffer from magical backlash." Magical backlash? Simon didn't think lingering a bit would do any harm, but when he heard Penelope Eisenhart's warning, he realized there might be other dangers in this magical space study. At this point, Penelope Eisenhart seemed to remember something else. She walked to her magical workbench, picked up the finished magical puppet, placed it in a delicate box, and said, "This is a farewell gift for you, Mr. Simon. Thank you for talking with me." When Simon heard this, he knew he had successfully survived. Without hesitation, Simon took the wooden box containing the magical puppet. It's a simple puppet with a yellowish skin that felt heavy in his hand, as if it contained numerous metal parts. The most peculiar thing about it was the barely noticeable blue magic runes on its surface. Simon didn't ask much, just simply smiled and said, "And thank you for your gift, Miss Eisenhart. Mr. Simon, we probably won't see each other again. Even if you come back next time, I may have forgotten you." There was a tinge of sadness on Penelope Eisenhart's face as the time to part ways drew near. Then, she unfastened a silver butterfly-shaped brooch from her medieval-style robe and pinned it onto Simon's chest. "This is my favorite brooch, a birthday present from my mother when I was 6. This is my small gift for you, in hopes that you can help me with something once you leave." With a delighted response, Simon agreed, "Sure. If you ever meet my parents, could you ask them?" Her words hung in the air. Penelope Eisenhart suddenly stopped, unable to continue. Simon puzzled, "Ask what?" With a sudden turn of pain in her voice, alternating between a terrifying old woman's voice and a girl's, Penelope Eisenhart continued, "Ask them, why did they burn me to death with magical flames?" Her words hung heavy in the room, casting an eerie chill. Simon was taken aback. He hadn't expected her to say something so shocking. The realization hit him that there was more to it than meets the eye. Penelope Eisenhart was burned to death by her own parents using magical flames? How could it be possible for loving parents to kill their beloved daughter? Before he could analyze further, Penelope Eisenhart seemed to be triggered by a dormant demon deep within her. Dark magic fog began swirling around her. She was on the verge of losing control. Seeing this, Simon gently stroked her head. Perhaps due to their close bond, his touch soothed her down. She lifted her head slowly. Her eyes, once filled with cursed magic, gradually regained their tranquility. With a solemn nod, Simon agreed, "All right, I promise you." She, too, had once loved this world with bravery, only to be given endless pain in return. "Goodbye." Penelope Eisenhart gave him a toothy grin, her eyes as clear as the starry sky, still as innocent and lovely. "I'm also very glad to have met you, Mr. Simon." Saying goodbye to a friend he'd only known for a few hours and probably would never see again, Simon felt a hint of melancholy. Suddenly, the scenery around him changed. The luxurious mansion where he had been was now a ruin. "Is this the remains of the mansion I was just in?" Simon thought. Although everything inside the house had decayed, the structure of the building itself was still intact, indicating that this was indeed the mansion he had just been in. The banquet hall, corridors, study, the layout was all too familiar. "It must have taken at least hundreds of years to deteriorate to this extent," Simon exclaimed, finding the sight before him inconceivable. He felt as if he was prepared for anything, but the sight of the dilapidated mansion still left him stunned. Could it be that the grand estate he had just been in was an illusion? Were Penelope and the bald man he'd met also illusions? But when Simon looked down, he saw a wooden box in his hand. It was the one that contained the magic puppet. And on his chest, he wore a butterfly-shaped brooch adorned with a black gem. The objects are real, Simon murmured, running his fingers over the box. It felt as if he had just woken up from a dream but somehow managed to bring something back from it. Could it be that the brightly lit mansion I was just in was some sort of special magical space? Simon looked around, but couldn't figure it out. His understanding of this world was too limited, and many questions couldn't be answered by just thinking about them. His next problem, however, was, where should he go now? The first thing that came to his mind was the message on the mysterious scroll. The previous owner came here in search of Sir Isaac's relic. Now that he had some free time, Simon decided to take a closer look at the cryptic messages on the mysterious scroll. He realized that the treasure the original owner was looking for was no ordinary item. Interestingly enough, he was also intrigued by the idea of these extraordinary powers. After some consideration, Simon decided to go take a look. He guessed that there was probably no danger left in the mansion. If there was any, Penelope would have been the biggest threat. Following his memory, Simon found the banquet hall of the mansion. Counting from the left, he located the 7th room. The door was completely decayed, with cobwebs everywhere, giving off an eerie vibe. However, the structure of the room was still solid. Apart from the spots where the paint on the walls had fallen off, it was still recognizable as a storeroom. Simon entered cautiously. Apart from the occasional squeaking of rats, there were no terrifying creatures like in horror movies. He took in everything in the room at a glance and saw the hexagonal lamp on the wall. After turning the correct lamp to the right, he heard a series of clicks. Then, a secret door appeared. Even after hundreds of years, this mechanism is still functioning properly. Simon said to himself, surprised at the dark passage that had appeared before him. Without hesitation, Simon stepped into the passage. He found that the air in the passage, cut off from the outside world, was well preserved. After testing, he found that he could breathe normally in there. The passage was lined with stone bricks, and a wall lamp was hung on the wall at regular intervals. The yellow gem, made from an unknown material, was weak but sufficient to illuminate the entire subterranean passage. Simon didn't dare touch anything. If the secret door could be opened normally, then the traps in the passage were likely to be fully operational as well. The message on the mysterious scroll had specifically warned him not to touch anything outside the safe route. After walking for a while, Simon noticed that the passage seemed to be repeating itself. He realized that he had entered a maze of illusions. He made some necessary navigation marks on the ground and continued on his way. After the first fork, left, right, up, down, fortunately, Simon had the correct path through the maze thanks to the mysterious scroll. He didn't encounter any trouble along the way. About 15 minutes later, he arrived at his destination, a spacious and hidden stone chamber. There were enormous glowing gemstones illuminating the entire room. Is this the altar of the Great Hermit marked on the hidden map? Simon didn't rush into the chamber but took a careful observation. In the center of the circular chamber, there were 5 tall stone statues wearing cloaks that covered their bodies and most of their faces, looking very mysterious. On closer inspection, 3 of the statues already had cracks, while only 2 remained intact. Behind each cloak of the statues, there was a mysterious symbol. It seemed like a special kind of code. What surprised Simon was the sacred and majestic feeling that hit him just by looking at these statues. It made him want to worship, as though he was being watched by a god, making him feel insignificant. What unique statues, Simon murmured as he looked at this scene. The world behind the veil was revealing its mysteries to him bit by bit, which only increased Simon's thirst for knowledge. There wasn't much in the chamber. The 5 statues stood in their own corners, facing a circular altar in the center with a diameter of about 5 meters. The altar was carved with an octagonal star magic circle, surrounded by some indecipherable special texts and runes, with an embossed pattern of an Ouroboros and a balance in the middle. Is this altar hiding the secret to gaining the bullet-resistant gift like the bald man? Simon looked at the patterns carved on the altar, a thoughtful expression on his face. The mysterious scroll also had this passage: "My dear Isaac, I'm sorry, you've lost everything." Through deciphering, I discovered an astonishing secret from the mysterious Isaac's alchemy manuscript that I received from our family. In addition to naturally awakening and bloodline inheritance, there's a third way to obtain extraordinary gifts, that is, through targeted awakening. Even though it's just an unverified, hidden map, it's the best way of compensation that I can think of for you. Simon didn't dwell on the passage. The cause and effect didn't matter anymore. He picked up a few key words: the medium of sacrifice, targeted awakening, gift. It said that after sacrificing his own eyeball, he might be able to obtain a very powerful S-level gifted ability. An extremely rare ability that everyone in the world of alchemy would dream of. If this was on Earth, Simon would have definitely dismissed it as a joke. Sacrificing his own eye to gain superpowers? How absurd. but after witnessing so many extraordinary powers, Simon carefully considered the proposition. As for the word might, it also carried an element of gambling because no one has tried it before. I remember the bald man called his bullet-resistant ability C079 Reinforced Skeleton. S-Class, seems to be even more powerful. Simon weighed the idea in his mind, not knowing how the rating of gifts differed in this world, but if he could obtain a superpower like the bald man, it seemed worth the sacrifice. He already had the urge to give it a try. What's more, Simon realized that the body he inhabited seemed to have a complicated background. Recognized by the important figure who left the message on the mysterious scroll, this altar was of a high standard. Perhaps the gifted ability awakened here would be even stronger than the steel skin. Opportunities always carried an element of gamble. In any world, the worst outcome would be losing his sight and getting nothing, having just survived a life-and-death battle. Simon felt that it wasn't an unacceptable price to pay. To gain something, one must sacrifice something. This is a basic rule that all worlds abide by. Thinking about this, he raised an eyebrow and comforted himself. I've come this far, why not give it a try? Simon made up his mind, and with a composed expression, he stepped onto the mysterious stone circle. Hesitation had never been a part of his nature. From the moment he decided to follow this route, he had been prepared. To be timid in such a fascinating fantasy world would be truly boring. Standing on the stone circle, with intricate symbols etched under his feet, Simon took a careful look. He had seen the bald man use such an alchemy array before. That guy created a suit of metallic scale armor with a hexagram magic circle. Obviously, the array etched on this stone circle was far more complicated. Bathing the Ouroboros in blood initiates the array. Following the instructions projected onto his retina, he tore off the bandage from his palm wound. A minor squeeze and the wound opened, blood seeping through his fingers, dripping onto the Ouroboros, engraved on the magic circle. The blood stained the Ouroboros, and the color spread automatically. The stone-carved snake body began to glow like a ruby. In an instant, the symbols on the stone circle lit up, emitting a blinding golden light. The operation of the array is normal. Simon muttered to himself, with a hint of joy. This was a good sign. It meant that the decoded method from the ISU alchemy manuscript had a high likelihood of being correct. After all, who would go to such lengths for a prank? The array was activated, and next was the sacrifice step. The instructions on his retina explained that all alchemy in this world abides by the equivalent exchange principle. To obtain such a talent, an equivalent price had to be paid. His sacrifice was his own eyeball. Simon released a slow breath, slowly raised his right hand towards his left eye, and jokingly muttered to himself, indeed, the body likes the thrill of pain. Even if it's gouging out its own eye. Gouging out an eye might be gruesome to others, but not to Simon. His first year in the orphanage, during one of his episodes, he had done so to a bully. After that, all the children there called him a madman. Later, after studying human medical physiology in the orphanage, he learned how to accurately and precisely kill, injure and hit people. Fear comes from the unknown, but Simon knew exactly what he was facing and was calm. He began the process without any hesitation, as if the pain was not his own. The piercing pain, the fear brought by blindness in one eye. Blood dripped from his eye socket onto the stone circle. The severe pain caused Simon's forehead to be covered in cold sweat, his complexion pale. After catching his breath, he held the bloody organ and placed it in the left basket of the balance engraving. At this moment, as if certain conditions had been activated, a dazzling red light burst from the center of the stone circle, swallowing the eyeball. At the same time, a green aura from the statue with a question mark symbol wrapped around it, quietly entering the bleeding left eye of Simon. This was a very complex alchemy conversion ceremony. This stone circle, which had been sealed for hundreds and thousands of years and had high specifications, seemed to connect with different times and spaces at this moment under the catalyst's drive. An ancient and majestic aura descended upon this underground temple. Simon was oblivious, but his limited perception allowed him to touch on the mysteries of this magical alchemy. It felt as if he was wandering in the boundless universe, plucking a dazzling star from the sky and incorporating it into his body. The process was smoother than he had imagined, without any unexpected occurrences. Simon didn't know what was happening, his vision filled with the color of blood. Soon, he clearly felt the pain in his eye fading away as the light in his left eye began to restore. I did it. Simon had a rough idea of what happened and breathed a sigh of relief. The tingling sensation was the phenomenon of muscle tissue regenerating, surprisingly quick. The entire process lasted about 3 minutes before the red light from the mystical rune formation on the stone array completely dimmed. At the instant the red light dissipated, the mysterious statue with a question mark symbol also cracked open a small gap. Simon's left eye gradually focused, clear and radiant, shining brightly like that of a newborn baby. Looking closely, in his golden pupils, there was a silvered moon. With a gleam, the moonlight disappeared into the depth of his pupils. It was a peculiar experience. The stone array in front of him was obviously the same as before, but it seemed like a strange, new world. Every object became incredibly clear, as if he was looking at a high-definition unfiltered photograph. Even the dense, spiderweb-like cracks on the statue were clearly distinguishable. So, what superhuman ability did I awaken? Is it enhanced vision? After the confirmation ceremony, Simon took a look around and then at his own body. He didn't seem to have changed in appearance. His vision, however, seemed to have improved a lot. Even in dim light, everything was crystal clear. He felt that if this were all, his ability would be far less impressive than the steel skeleton ability of that bald guy. But just as Simon was sneering in his heart, a strange feeling occurred. As he inspected his body carefully, trying to see things clearly in his blurred vision, a strange line of text popped up in his eyes. Simon, Isolde, Dark Spirit Power, 233/1130 Charisma 9 Strength 6 Dexterity 6 Constitution 5 Perception 4 Skill 8 Spiritual Power 26 Gift S018, All-Seeing Eye, Skills, Herman Breathing Method, Primary Crossbow Proficiency, Advanced Swordsmanship Entry, Combat Power Comprehensive Evaluation, B+, for an ordinary person who has not yet awakened superpowers, apart from being handsome, you are weak. But you, who have awakened the S-level talent All-Seeing Eye, have endless possibilities in the future. Seeing this, it was as if time had stood still for a moment. Simon was astonished. Mysterious visual interface. When he saw this batch of data appearing on his retina, he felt as if he was playing a game, but when he saw the Gift S018, All-Seeing Eye, on the interface, he finally realized. So, the extraordinary ability awakened by this sacrifice ceremony is this ability? Doesn't seem to be that powerful, Simon murmured in his heart, understanding why the item he needed to sacrifice was his eyeball. So this directional awakening means to exchange an eye for an eye. Simon's thoughts were erratic. He didn't dwell on things he couldn't change. Instead, he jeered at the evaluations on the interface. So his expert swordsmanship, which could defeat 10 on Earth, is just an advanced entry, that's fine, and his crossbow skills, honed by spending most of his savings at the shooting range, are just primary proficiency. What would advanced proficiency in crossbow skill look like? Can the arrow turn a corner? Also, a comprehensive evaluation, weakling, not much damage, extremely insulting. Hehe, compared to that bald guy, I guess I am a weakling. Simon gave a bitter smile but generally understood the combat power system of this world and that strange, Herman breathing method, should be a passive skill mastered by the original owner. Before, Simon felt a strange energy flowing inside his body, his breathing naturally following a certain rhythm, something almost instinctual, similar to muscle memory and the dark elemental power. It should be similar to the inner elemental control in his previous life. But when he looked at his attribute panel again, there was a hint of confusion. All the other attributes were fine, but the 26 points of spiritual power was too striking. Is it because of multiple personalities? Simon pondered, holding his chin. But before he had time to think, suddenly, an unexpected situation occurred. At that moment, the altar, whose light had already dissipated, suddenly lit up again. This time it wasn't golden light, but a cold light shrouded in gray fog. It was as if a passage to hell had been opened. He felt a shivering breath that originated from the soul. What's going on? The alchemy array has started again. Simon was greatly puzzled as the information on the mysterious visual interface did not record such strange situations during the ceremony, but he didn't react, because this scene was very similar to his previous awakening. After the light of the magical array flashed, finally the statue with the mysterious question mark lit up. A faint black light overflowed from the statue. The transformation process this time was much faster than before. The gift has already awakened. Why is there another one? I didn't make another sacrifice. Simon watched this familiar process, greatly puzzled. At the same time, he felt as if something intangible was pulled out from his body, strangely making him feel a lot lighter. Before long, the 8-pointed star faded and the statue cracked open again. Now, out of the 5 statues, none were intact. Simon also clearly felt that the mysterious and awe-inspiring feeling that these statues had given him suddenly disappeared, becoming ordinary stone carvings. Simon looked at his panel again, wanting to know what had happened to his body. Then, he saw that a new talent had been added to his talent column, Gift S004 Reaper. Double talent? What's that? Simon didn't fully understand the basic workings of this world, so even with this extra talent, he didn't know what it was for. Moreover, he noticed that his mental strength had reduced from 26 to 18. He had lost 8 points of mental strength, and the previously ringing whispers in his ear had completely disappeared. Simon guessed, the principle of this altar is to offer sacrifices in exchange for some extraordinary talents. Before it was an eye for an eye. Now that my mental strength has decreased, could it be, the residual soul of the original owner was fully sacrificed, and in return, I gained a new talent? He didn't dwell on this speculation since there was no way to confirm it. However, an absurd thought rose in Simon's mind. If he wasn't a traveler from another world, what would a normal person sacrifice to acquire this talent? Would they commit suicide on the altar and offer their soul? What exactly is this S004 Death Reaper talent useful for? This wasn't a game, and there were no skill usage instructions in reality. Simon stared at it for a while, but still had no clue, nor did his body feel any increase in power. After pondering for a moment, he stopped worrying about it and went back to testing the ability he gained from his eyes. Soon, he turned his gaze to a few stone sculptures, and words flashed before his eyes. Broken stone sculpture, detailed explanation, a stone sculpture that has lost its extraordinary power, of no observational significance. This time, Simon had a rough idea of what this talent was for. Isn't this the appraisal skill in games? The impact of this talent on his combat power was, well, to put it nicely, not great, but to be honest, it was utterly useless. This could be classified as an auxiliary function. At least, in a real fight, it was nowhere near the same level as Bald Ivan's steel skeleton. Maybe I didn't understand the use of this all-seeing eye, perhaps there are abilities that haven't been developed yet. Such a complex awakening ceremony couldn't be this simple. Simon wasn't too disappointed as he looked at it. At least his eyesight had improved, which seemed to make his shooting more accurate. He suddenly remembered something, walked down the altar, took out the rune puppet that Pistoia had given him, and appraised it. This turned out to be a fantastic item. Cursed item, rune puppet, quality, gold description, it dislikes being controlled by people, it prefers to control humans, cursed characteristics, in a 10-meter radius, it can indiscriminately control any creature with mental strength less than 15, inducing hypnosis, physical confusion, madness, detailed explanation, Alchemist's mysterious puppeteer inauguration material. After inauguration, it significantly improves skill and agility attributes, and comprehends exclusive heritage. Skills, evaluation, body compatibility rate 93%, this is already a very high-quality profession advancement material. If it weren't for this all-seeing eye, Simon wouldn't have expected that a doll, which he thought was merely a souvenir, could be so powerful. Physical confusion. Isn't that one of Pistoia's extraordinary abilities? He looked at the detailed explanation of the puppet and immediately thought about the scene at the banquet where he was eating uncontrollably. This ability to completely strip away control of the body was indeed uncanny. So it's indiscriminate mental control. Simon looked at it and his face turned serious. If his mental strength wasn't stronger than average, having this thing around might drive him mad. Well, it's like carrying around a dangerous, nuclear radiation toy. At this point, he noticed a new term in the detailed explanation, inauguration material. He thought about how Bald Ivan had transformed his body into metal scales using a magic circle. Could this be some kind of special advancement method for a particular profession? Simon's mind was filled with various strange knowledge, and he speculated that this so-called inauguration should be similar to a job change in games. Penelope's job should be puppet master. But how do I inaugurate? Simon's mind was full of questions, and he sighed softly. He knew too little about this world and lacked many necessary common senses. However, it seems that having the ability of this all-seeing eye is quite practical. At least it allows him to understand these magical items, instead of being completely clueless. Simon carefully returned the puppet back to the wooden box. To his surprise, upon careful inspection, the wooden box adorned with runes was also a precious item. Level 2 rune-sealed wooden box explanation, a special alchemical box that can block mental fluctuations. If you look carefully, you'll find some inscription on it. Simon had previously noticed something special about the patterns on this box. Now, seeing this hint and taking a closer look, he found that these patterns were actually dense tiny characters, a complete beginner's guide to puppet making. Could it be that Penelope thinks my mental power is strong enough to be a puppet master, so she not only gave me the profession conversion item, but also provided the profession skill manual? Simon suddenly thought of the blonde-haired, blue-eyed well-behaved little girl, and he couldn't help but feel a sense of regret deep in his heart. What a pity. He also remembered the promise he made to the young girl, to help her find out why her parents had burnt her to death. But Belmont Manor had been abandoned for at least a few centuries, her parents were probably long gone. This promise might never be realized. Then, he glanced at the butterfly pin that the little girl had pinned on his chest. It was also an extraordinary item. Penelope's pin focus +10 explanation, a pin with a strong resentment. A delicate alchemical product, it allows the wearer to study, cast, work, with better focus. But long-term wear may lead to violent and rebellious behavior due to the resentment. Note, your supernatural ability prevents you from perceiving or understanding things that are far beyond your cognitive level, so after careful perception, you also see a string of unknown. Staring at the pin, Simon originally thought it was just a small gift from the girl. But when he saw the line of, in the note at the back, a string of question marks popped up in his mind as well. A sense of enigma immediately hit him. Could there be something hidden in this pin that he temporarily couldn't understand? What could it be that even he, the one with the all-seeing eye, can't understand? Is it like explaining the concept of three-dimensional and four-dimensional space to a two-dimensional creature, who could hear and see but just couldn't understand? Something that even a transmigrator like him couldn't understand, must be no simple matter. Is there a secret hidden in this pin? Simon instinctively felt something was amiss, and at this time, the problem that troubled Simon resurfaced in his mind. Why would Penelope's parents burn her to death? Could it be, there was something wrong with her? In this world full of supernatural powers, who knows what strange existences there might be. If it weren't for the all-seeing eye, perhaps Simon wouldn't have noticed anything unusual about the pin. But now that he had discovered it, he had an added sense of caution. However, Simon thought Penelope was the big boss of Belmont Manor, it was best not to harbor doubts here. So, he decided to leave this place first.